Okay, so I think we'll get started. We're so delighted that Allison Lieberman offered to lead a Maven session for us this evening. Mainly, we're just so excited that the Liebermans joined the temple and have gotten so involved with the congregation. And I see Diane Zamek is here. She must be your guest, Allison.
Yes, that's my parents.
Oh, we love those spelling parents to come on these Zooms. Yes,
That's my
absolutely.
parents. Do they have, Mom, you need to turn the video on.
We don't see you, but
I'm trying, Allison. I'm trying.
So do you use the name Zamek, Allison?
I do at work, actually.
Okay, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, that's totally fine.
Okay. All right. And so for those of you who don't know Allison, well, you should get to know her and the whole family, but also she is a high school, am I saying it right? Guidance counselor? Is that what you call it?
Yeah. I'm the college counselor.
College counselor at, is it called Zion Benton High School?
Yeah.
Okay. And so our neighbor just to the south. And I know we're all concerned about the effects of the pandemic on our young people, and she knows a lot about that. So she's going to share with us tonight. So thank you, Allison.
Yeah, absolutely. Concerned with the effects, buckle up because it's been a wild ride, I do have to say. And at any point, this shouldn't take honestly more than an hour. And at any point, if you have any questions, just feel free to, just kind of interrupt. Totally fine. Or if you want to put it in the chat, I can actually see things. I have my phone running too, so I can see the chat as well. So just a little bit about what we're going to what I'll talk about tonight. A little bit of background information, kind of going back to the very beginning of the pandemic, and just kind of chronologically making our way through. But especially taking a look at the effects kind of separately, but related between elementary and middle school students, both kind of looking at academic, social, and emotional effects for elementary and middle school students, and then separately for high school and college age students. A lot of times we kind of forget in the midst of all of this that college age students were really hit by this too. In terms of academic, social, and emotional effects. So the biggest thing, the biggest way to describe, especially coming out of stay-at-home orders and that kind of thing for students, the best way that I've heard someone describe it is that they were just stunted when everybody came back, whatever that looked like. For a combination of these reasons, the upheaval of just everything shutting down, the uncertainty with what's going to happen, and then also the isolation. I'm sure that we all felt both staying at home, and then as things were kind of going forward, what does this look like? Where can I go? What can I do? What can I do? Where do I feel comfortable? Just isolation in general. And I do have to say that this is not necessarily going to be the experience that all students had, and the same reaction either. It very much is on a person by person basis, I should say. So kind of the background, schools closed in mid-March of 2020. And at the time, a lot of the school staff, we were told, oh, it's going to be for like 2 weeks. And I'm sure at work, a lot of people were told, oh, it's just for 2 weeks, right? And here we are, right? So kind of traveling back to almost 3 years ago now, everything closed and everything just kind of was there. However, at the same time, most teachers had never taught online before. Like this kind of thing that we're doing right now didn't exist in our vocabulary. We had no idea what to do. Zoom sort of was there, but it never really, it was something that like business people do, right? Like, and it cost money and schools didn't purchase it and that kind of thing. And even Google Classroom, it wasn't, you can do Google Meets, or at the time you could do Google Meets, but no one really used it in a school setting because we never had the need to, right? So teachers tried their best when everything shut down. My son, Robbie, he was in kindergarten at the time, and the teacher would have a weekly book reading, and she would hold up the book, but everything was backwards, right? Because the camera reverses everything. And so she didn't know what to do. And so here she is showing kindergartners backwards language, right? So we had no idea really what to do, right? Some teachers went home, to different houses and, delivered packets and, oh, it's so good to see you kind of thing. But no one really had to, right? For elementary and middle school students, basically everything stopped then, right? Like for Robbie, for example, he was in kindergarten, had a weekly, book reading, and, oh, hey, let's hang out, and show each other our stuffed animals. And that was it. For other kids, being older, those with phones, for example, they started, video conferencing basically with each other. And that was it. That's all that they did. So everything kind of just stopped. In high school, and I'm not 100% sure in Wisconsin, but I know in Illinois, the grade for the term for that semester could be based on the grade as of the day of closing, right? So if a student had an A on March 13th of 2020, they got an A for that class, right? And just boom, we're done with the semester right here and there. Or in Illinois, they had the option of picking a pass or a fail. And schools were kind of uneven about who they allowed doing pass fail. So it was kind of all over the place. And so I'll get to it in a few minutes, but with colleges, for example, they're looking at that semester to see like, okay, was that really an A? Was that really a B? Or did you just, right? What was it, right? If it was a pass, like, were you covering up a D and, have no idea what really happened in that semester? I think Wisconsin was very similar. I could be wrong about that. Time lost meaning, right? Students didn't have to be anywhere. Parents didn't really have to be anywhere. And so we all just kind of floated along, right? It was a little bit like summer vacation for students, but the weather wasn't good, right? And so you just kind of like, oh, hey, it's getting dark. We should probably eat dinner, kind of thing some days, right? And so that time lost all meaning kind of will come back for us. The Federal Department of Education that spring also waived the state testing requirements. And so in Wisconsin, in high schools, the state testing requirement is the ACT test for juniors. Didn't have to do it. In Illinois, it's the SAT test for juniors. Didn't have to do it. So the juniors, 11th graders in the spring of 2020, they did not have their ACT or SAT test, okay? And that federal requirement didn't come back to schools until the fall of 21. So it was like a year-ish, right? A year and a little bit more, that requirement came back. So for the younger kids, for example, like MAP testing, the standardized testing didn't have to happen for an entire school year. The one caveat with the testing though, AP testing for the spring of 2020, advanced placement testing, did happen, and it happened online. So the students that were in, let's say, AP biology or AP psychology in May of 2020, they took their tests on their Chromebooks or iPads or whatever it was, and they actually took an online advanced placement test. College board said, nope, we're going forward with this. That spring and into the summer, if we remember back, sort of pandemic related, kind of not. There was racial, socioeconomic things happening as well. And a lot of school districts had to grapple with addressing inequalities and also student trauma, whatever that trauma looked like, right? It didn't have to look like you saw something. It could be just the culmination of everything together. Parent losing jobs, racial tensions, whatever it might be, kind of all coming together, right? And then for the 2021 school year, a lot of states said that the school districts had options, right? Here's our guidelines. We suggest one of these three options or whatever it is. School districts, you as the local authority get to choose which one. And so it turned into this piecemeal of a map, really, of, this school district decided to do this kind of school education and teaching, and the neighboring district did something completely different, right? And so a lot of it was kind of uneven that way. A lot of times, though, schools started with one option, and then because of COVID cases rising and falling, they had to switch between different options. And I'll talk about the options in a few minutes. And then finally, in the 21-22 school year, everyone came back in person. And I'll talk about the options and what that kind of looked like after in the 21-22 school year. So for the 2021 year, where the states gave districts options, there really were three options, I should say. One option is, and I don't have it on here, I thought I did. Everybody in person, we're just all wearing masks, everybody's in person, right? No matter what. Another option was virtual, online, right? Like how we're doing here, could be live or it could be self-paced, where the teacher, that tended to be more for high school and college, where the teacher would post something and the student, like a link, and the student would do their work and then submit it, and there's our learning, right? No interaction like this whatsoever. Or it could be, the third option would be hybrid, where it would be oftentimes a rotational schedule of both in-person and virtual. And districts did that in order to spread out people, and depending on what their buildings could hold, different classrooms, different spaces. Oftentimes the hybrid was kind of revolving around lunch periods, that we want to avoid lunch periods, and so we'll do half days kind of thing. This year, the 2021 year, was also the rise of what was called pandemic pods, where groups of parents would kind of bring their kids together to somebody's house or whatever it was, where the kids would do virtual learning at the same location, right? So you have unevenness there too, where maybe the neighborhood, kids got together at somebody's house on a different day to do their school, but they also had like, okay, we're going to go outside and play and have lunch together and that kind of thing. Whereas other students maybe didn't have that. So in the 2021 year, we're going to talk about elementary and middle school first, and then talk about high school for the same school year. For a lot of schools, and I think Kenosha Unified was also virtual or hybrid for that year as well. There's a lot of, first of all, a lot of pre-kindergarten or daycares, right? We're talking about like younger kids, younger than 5 now. A lot of them either had fewer spots because of state requirements for spacing or how many people you could have in the room, or they were virtual, pre-kindergarten virtually, or they were closed. They just simply closed. A lot of daycares just closed. We can't deal with this. We can't do, and there's too many restrictions, and we're just not going to do it. Or the parents just didn't feel comfortable enrolling their student, maybe their child, maybe the student at the time was 4 years old, and they were thinking, okay, we'll do like a half day, preschool kind of thing. They just didn't do it. So that eventually is going to lead to some other things as well. So for elementary, common things in the academic side of things. Number one, districts told the teachers, pair everything down to just the basics, right? If you were to pick out like 5 things that language arts needs to learn in the first half of this year, what are they, right? So just pare it down to just the basics. That also meant for a lot of teachers, those, fun projects that we get to do a lot of, and, oh, we really look forward to this in this school year, didn't happen, right? For elementary, a lot of districts tried to have, if they could, to have in person for the elementary kids, especially for the younger ones, like K through 2. But because of spacing issues, a lot of times though, they couldn't get everybody in. And so they would do live online. And so if you can imagine first graders, second graders doing this for even like 3-4 hours a day, right? You would walk in and see like somebody like in the little screens here, in the little squares, like somebody jumping on the bed and somebody else doing this, and right, like all over the place, especially for the littles. It also led to the rise of a lot of elementary teachers, especially in the early grades, having concerns for foundational skills. How can I see what you're doing if you're not even sitting? I can't even look over your shoulder to see like what's happening here, right? So the foundational skills in reading and phonics and in math, right? Virtual, right? Whatever the virtual time frame was, also had very little practice for handwriting. And even now for, let's say, third graders and second graders, it's a holdover. A lot of their handwriting is because they didn't have that foundational practice, right? There are a lot of parents, or there were a lot of parents that year where their child was supposed to go into kindergarten in the 2021 year, and they redshirted them. They decided not to enroll for kindergarten just because they didn't want them to have their kindergarten experience to be virtual or hybrid, right? They wanted to have it in person. And so they redshirted them. They just said, you know what, we're going to wait another year. On the social and emotional side, a lot of students had that lack of social contact and also context, right? Think about like a classroom of a bunch of students, and we think of maybe like, groups of students kind of sitting together and working together, or like, hey, you guys go over here and do your reading group, and you guys go over here and do like your math manipulatives, whatever it might be. That social context didn't exist. And so what started happening was that a lot of students had increase in negative behaviors because there was no social cues for checking the negative behaviors, right? Like, oh, like the little kids like saying to each other and like the looks and that, oh, maybe I shouldn't have said that. That didn't happen. And so we saw a lot of students have really negative behaviors because of it, right? That no one was really checking them. And also, like I said before, decreased teacher check-ins as well, where, the teacher couldn't, just kind of walk over and put their hand on somebody's shoulder who should be, to help redirect. It didn't happen, right? Because I can't touch you right now, right? It also led to an increase for a lot of parental help and oversight, right? And I put those in quotes because I'm being a little sarcastic about that. There were a number of parents who, would sit kind of right there, right off the screen, and sit with their child and sit there the entire day with their child and helping them, and also, watching the other children and watching the teacher, right? Things that in person would have never happened, right? Mom doesn't come to school with you to sit next to you, right? But a lot of times it was happening, right? There's stories of elementary teachers getting emails from parents saying like, oh, I was watching your class and I noticed this and I noticed that. So there's a lot of stress from sometimes the parents too, for the teachers, like, oh, I saw this happen. And the teacher's like, that was like at 10:30 in the morning, like we were doing math. Like, what are you talking, like, why are you watching us? But it was happening, right? On the middle school side of thing, again, told to pare down just to the basics. So for example, pre-algebra, what are the 5 main things in first semester pre-algebra that you should know. Just do that, right? Those students were also more likely to be live online or working on their own because they're a little bit older. What some districts did was to spread students out. For the younger kids, they would use the middle school buildings to spread everything out so that you have like kindergartners, first grade, second grade, maybe in the elementary school, and then the third, fourth, and fifth graders at the middle school, but doing third, fourth, and fifth grade work, right, with their teacher. If they were in person, when, you know, if in a hybrid situation, right? So with that, then you have the middle schoolers having no space. And so they're going to be online working on their own, right? And so again, paring down to just the basics, right? How quick can we get through this work and just type it up and boom, submit it? Here you go, right? That also led to my next 2 points here, lowering basically of critical thinking and essay writing skills, right? Because the students were just boom, 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 there you go, here it is. And so they really weren't interacting in middle school the way that, with materials, the way that they would have if it was in a in-person classroom setting. Essay writing, the beginnings of how do you think critically and how do you kind of synthesize information to put together in a statement, essay style. A lot of students had trouble with it because there was no, hey, can you look at this and just kind of see? It was all on Google a lot of times and just comments, right? This also led to a rise in flexibility in deadlines, where a lot of times the school would tell the teachers, okay, just the basics, yes, but we need to, and going back to the idea of student trauma and everything that's been happening over the past 6 months, we need to be flexible in our understanding of students being able to get work done. We don't know what's happening at home. We don't know, you know, how the student is feeling and the stress at home or whatever the case might be. And so it's okay if you don't hand in something, you know, just make sure you get it done, kind of thing was oftentimes what teachers were being told to tell students. On the social emotional side, in middle school is really when a lot of that social context really comes into play. And, you know, kind of evolving friendships and developing like a deeper understanding of what friendship is. But for a lot of middle school students for that school year, the 2021 year, it turned into more of a floating friendship. Hey, I saw this video. Did you too? Yeah, let's talk about the video, right? Instead of kind of that hangout kind of friendship that happens in middle school. A lot of increase in negative behaviors, similar to elementary, but also a little bit more on the depression side, right? The anxiety side. That they're in middle school, they were better able by that age to express, hey, you know what, I'm not feeling right. You know, I don't feel like this. For a lot of middle school students, sometimes they didn't even have to have their cameras on for the virtual classes. And so we saw this more in high school, but for middle school students too, it was very easy for them to wake up in the morning, roll over, log in, roll back over. They're checked in for attendance. They're half listening to what's going on. How much are they really learning, right? And so that kind of like negative behavior in terms of like, I just don't feel like doing anything because, you know, all I'm doing is here and typing and that kind of thing, right? In that age bracket also, especially attuned to isolation, right? Where did my people go? I can't, you know, get together with people. I'm feeling really lonely here, right? For high school and college students for the same school year, 2021, high school students, looking at the academics, right? Again, in high school, teachers were told, just the basics, right? Pare everything down as much as you can. For the graduation requirements, a lot of high schools in Illinois were allowed to change their graduation requirements so that instead of having to have, for example, a lot of high schools kind of go over the minimum that the state requires in terms of classes for high school graduation. A lot of districts brought down their high school graduation requirements, right? So instead of having to have 3 years of social studies, which is one more than the state of Illinois requires, for example, they said, you know what, 2's okay. It's the minimum that the state requires. Totally fine if you fail an entire year of social studies. We're good still for graduation, right? And so a lot of issues in terms of kind of like the rigor of what that year involved, right? Schedules for high school students oftentimes were rotational or even scaled back. A lot of high schools went to a half day, actually middle school too, went to a half day kind of situation to avoid lunch, right? Imagine like a crazy high school cafeteria with like 100 students, not going to happen that school year, right? And so instead, let's have like a sort of block schedule where it's like Monday and Wednesday, you have your odd numbered period classes. Tuesday, Thursday, you have your even period classes. And then Friday, we're going to flip flop by week, right? So you had class 3 days a week, depending on the week, right? So that kind of rotation oftentimes was seen. Testing issues for both ACT and SAT in 2021, students could not get a seat. It was being offered, couldn't get a seat because instead of being able to have 100 people in a room taking the ACT or the SAT, the host site would now only be able to have 25 or 50 students, right? And so, hey, guess what? Half of the people that were going to take it now couldn't, right? And so everybody was kind of scrambling, especially juniors of that school year. How do I get a seat in the test? Or the host site, which oftentimes are local high schools, the host site would all of a sudden cancel the test just because the rise in case numbers, and they just couldn't do the test. And so the testing agency, ACT or College Board for SAT, they would then reschedule registered students for anywhere where they could find them. So I heard students that year got rescheduled to take the test in Louisville, Kentucky, for example. Now, how are students supposed to get there? Like, are we going to stay in a hotel? Like, what are we doing here, right? And so the lack of access for the test for a lot of juniors, especially that year, just increased the anxiety for a lot of them, right? Very similar for AP for the spring of 2020 was very similar in 2021. AP College Board said, we're doing it, no problem, right? Academically, very similar to middle school, students or teachers were told to allow flexibility in deadlines, or to make things due at, let's say, January 25th at 11:59 p.m., right? Instead of like at the end of the school day or whatever it is, right? So you can submit at 11:59 p.m. and still be good to go, right? So that flexibility was still there in terms of handing in work, right? A lot of students had help from Google, right? I mean, why not? Nobody's looking, right? So why not, right? If I don't understand it and I don't have a teacher to ask, I'm going to go to Google, right? Social and emotional for effects for high school students of that year. A lot of sports, a lot of clubs either weren't meeting or had to be cut in half or whatever the case might be. Ninth graders going into high school in the 2021 year, they didn't have the usual transition, right, into high school. And so that also led for them a lot of anxiety as well, right? Just overall with high school students, an increase in anxiety and depression, right? They lost their social network, right? They lost their ability to be with their friends a lot of times, right? Or if their schedule was completely different than their friend's schedule, they never really saw them, right? For a lot of high school students and even middle school students for that year, there was a huge increase in online presence outside of what school was. And for a lot of students, an increase in family responsibilities, right? If mom or dad are at home also, but they have their work that they have to do as well, right? Who's giving your younger, the younger sibling lunch during the day, right? Sometimes it's going to be the high school student, because very often they only had a half day of class, right? And so we have some anxiety because of that as well, right? On the college side of things, many colleges for the 2021 year were fully virtual. And what a lot of colleges did actually is that they allowed students to move into the actual dorm rooms, right, if they wanted to. And with that, they had to, at the beginning of the school year, had to quarantine themselves. So can you imagine moving into your dorm room in college, but you couldn't leave it, and the meals were delivered to you from dining services, right? And so for the first 2 weeks, here you are sitting in your room, you and your roommate or whatever it is, and you're just sitting there, right? And then on top of that, your classes were all virtual, right? And a lot of times, first year students going into college that school year, they said, you know what? I'm going to wait for another year, right? I'm going to go to community college, or I'm going to do something else, because that's not what I was looking forward to, right? In the fall of 2020. On top of that, the professors and instructors honestly had overall, as a general statement, a lack of the technology knowledge needed for teaching effectively in an online capacity, right? Where maybe they're standing way over there, right? Writing on the board and nobody can see anything, right? Lack of rigor, especially in the four-year colleges. Again, how do we do this, right? In an effective way if we don't know what we're doing with it. Admissions to college for that school year had to go test optional, because the students, the high school students from the class of 2021, right, when they were juniors in the spring of 2020, they didn't have the tests. They didn't have the test scores. They continued to not be able to take the tests. And so admissions for college right now, even still, is test optional because of it, right? Because of the pandemic. Social and emotional. For college students, a lot of professors and colleges were just overall ill-equipped to handle student mental health. That's not what historically they're in the business of, right? Of saying like, hey, are you really doing okay here? You know what? We have something on campus to help you, right? You should go, right? Maybe it was like 2 counselors on campus or whatever it is, right? For the students coming into college, lack of first year transition, right? The whole like, hey, welcome week and that kind of thing didn't happen, right? For them. And for a lot of them, then it turned into like the development of the adult self, right? Which for a lot of students it begins in college. It either stopped or it didn't start because of the first year transition, or because the social contacts were just not there, right? That academic year, right? And for a lot of students, then that kind of created like a self-reflection piece for them. Like, what am I doing, right? How do I really want to do this, right? Maybe I want to do something else, right? And then moving forward in time, right? Again, the upheaval and I think I need to wait and see what happens, or I don't know what to do, right? I just don't know what to do anymore. For the 21-22 school year, kind of back to normal for the most part, right? For the most part, with some after effects. So for elementary and middle school students, honestly, that school year, which is the 21-22 school year, lower test scores, right? When they started testing again, like the standardized tests, even in elementary school, like the MAP tests and the other elementary tests, those test scores from last school year or 2 school years ago, whatever it is, I lost track of time, lowered compared to the pre-pandemic, right? Similar kid, right? So 3rd grade test scores were lower compared to students who were in 3rd grade in the fall of 2019. Okay. I even read somewhere a study that looked at students that had to leave New Orleans because of Hurricane Katrina way back in 2005, that their test scores did not fall as far as students' test scores fell between the fall of 19 and the fall of 21. So that's huge, right? Tutoring and support. Schools realized that they needed to offer tutoring and interventions and support, even for little kids, right? Oftentimes, there's no money for that, right? School districts, really tight budget. The federal government and the state governments have what are called ESSER funds now. And they're going to run out soon, right? In a year or so. But those funds are meant to pay for things like summer school, right? You didn't test so well. We need to help you with your foundational academic skills, tutoring during the school day, that kind of thing, right? That school year, a lot of learning caps had to be filled, especially in the early elementary, kindergarten, 1st, 2nd, 3rd grade, right? Students are just now sort of getting back on track, right, from that. Renavigation. A lot of students forgot simply how to be around others in and out of the classroom, right? Especially if they were in a hybrid or all virtual, right? How do I talk to people, right? How do I make friends? How do I approach someone? How do I not interrupt people, right? All of those social contacts and things that we naturally do, right? Because we're adults and we learned how to do it, they didn't. And so they had to learn how to renavigate, right? That also oftentimes led to altercations, honestly, even in elementary school, arguments and fights in elementary school, right? Because the students just did not know how to self-regulate and have that social back and forth with each other. Also led to a lot of misunderstanding, especially in non-class times. A lot of teachers last year were really good in elementary about like helping students navigate how to talk to each other and you know, oh, you know, this is really what she meant kind of thing. However, when there's no teacher, recess, bus, after school activities, that kind of thing, this person said this, and I can't believe they said this, and blah, 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 kind of thing, right? A lot of social misunderstanding last school year, especially for little kids. So similar for high school and college, lowered academic achievement, right? Lower test scores, even to this day. ACT and SAT scores are lower than where they were before. Some of this is also because the students are now used to redos on tests, right? Time lost all meaning and deadlines lost all meaning. And so, hey, you know what? It's okay if I just didn't do so well, I can do it again, right? Schools also started offering in high school even more tutoring, more support, both social, emotional, and also academic, right? A lot of schools still to this day are dealing with having to have, you know, tutoring during the school day, for example. Expectations. A lot of high school and college students developed some personal goals through, you know, that isolation and that self-reflection that a lot of times didn't include education. You know, maybe I want to open a crocheting business, right? I got really good at crocheting, right? Because I watched a lot of videos when I was home doing nothing. You know, maybe I want to do that. Maybe I'll take some business classes and, you know, maybe that'll be my life, you know, and I'll drive around in a van. And that is awesome, right? Because I saw it on TikTok and it sounds good to me and I like it. So maybe that's what I'll do, right? The question that we hear a lot of is, do I have to? Do I have to do this? Why should I do this? Right? Kind of questioning what the expectation is and why do I even have to do this? Right? For a lot of high school students, especially that school year, they had a lack of access to colleges also. And so their expectation kind of lowered in terms of what college is, what does it look like? You know, the school year before, right, the 2021 school year, colleges were not offering tours, right? And so if you were a junior that year, not only did you not take, you know, the test, you also didn't go to check out a bunch of different schools. So maybe I really just don't want to do this, right? Should I do this even, right? Social renavigation, even in high school, even in college, people forgot how to be people around other people, right? And so that, like we see with little kids, the interrupting, how do you communicate, right? The adults in the school, we even saw it too, where we would talk, and then talk, and talk, right? Some of it had to do with, we're so used to kind of a lag in Zoom kind of thing, right? Or, you know, I'm not really seeing you, and so I'm just going to talk, right? And so we had to learn how to be people around other people again, right? Huge increase in fights that school year, huge increase, even in schools, high schools that never saw fights before, really, huge increase, right? Social media feuds spilling into high schools. Oh, I saw this and I can't believe it, right? And again, the different time orientation, right? Because time lost all meaning, and I'm not sure I really want to do this anyways, and what's the meaning of life kind of thing. I have no urgency right now, right? Yeah, I think I'll get to it at some point, but you know, we'll see what happens. I'm thinking about it, maybe. Yeah, I'll get to it. Now, this school year, people are resilient, honestly. Students, especially little kids, they bounce back, throw them against the wall, totally fine, right? But people have changed, absolutely, right? People have changed. Schools have changed as well, right? So, biggest overall, I hope, is a lasting effect for schools overall is the understanding that school is not just about academics, that the students that are in the classrooms and ultimately the ones that you get data from and test scores and that kind of stuff, that they're people, and that social emotional well-being on all levels of education is just as important as, do you know what 2 + 2 is, right? Because you can't learn if you can't be present in the time frame because you're so worried about other things that are happening, right? Also for schools, the realization that there's an importance in academic supports, right? You can't just say, okay, here you go, right? That you sometimes have to take students by the hand and say, okay, I'm noticing that there's something happening here. Do you need some help, right? Elementary students, even this year, we're starting to see it kind of go away a little bit, but elementary students may be more behind, not so much academically, because the elementary students or teachers were awesome last year about filling a lot of the academic gaps. A lot of times it's more on the social and emotional side, right? Of, especially for elementary students, where they're a little bit more behind. More on the middle school through college side of things, right? A lot of students are indecisive about big decisions. I don't know what to do. I don't know if I want to go to college. I don't know, you know, or I think I want to go to college. I just don't, you know, it'll come later kind of thing, right? I'm exaggerating a little bit, but another big change is standardized testing, both ACT, SAT, and also for like professional schools like MCAT and LSAT. A lot of those are online now. Yes, ACT is online. SAT is going fully online starting next year. MCAT has already been online. A lot of placement tests are what are called adaptive online, where as you answer questions, it gives you different questions depending on how you answer the previous questions. So I do think that an overall lasting effect is that standardized testing is going to be fully online within the next 5 years. No more paper and pencil, writing it, filling in bubbles kind of thing. And college admissions continues to be test optional because of the students' academic history in high school. I think that's going to start ending though, especially for starting with the current juniors, the class of 25. I think they may be the last class because they were in 9th grade in the 2021 school year. I think they're going to be the last one. So 10th grade and younger, I think colleges are going to feel comfortable saying, you know what, we want a test score again, right? Although some schools are like, it was okay. We didn't really, it just showed us one single data point of a single day, single morning that maybe you weren't feeling well. It's okay. We're good. We'll have you do an essay instead, right? For admissions. So I think those are kind of like overall lasting effects that we may see kind of moving forward, right? That's what I have, right? Hopefully, right? Let me stop sharing here. Hopefully you buckled up. It's been a wild ride. I do have to say, like, there's been nothing that could have prepared any teacher for any of this, right? And we learned a lot, honestly, right? We learned a heck of a lot. Like this slideshow, even, for example, I would have had no idea, and I didn't draw all of this. I took it because that's what we do as teachers, right? But all of the free, like online or low cost things, like make it look cool. We're there now, right? We know how to do it. And the classroom, it's been a number of years since I've been in the classroom. Classroom teachers, it's awesome what they do, right? It's really cool. Like if you have a student that's in high school or middle school now, it's just boom, 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 here it is. And it's awesome, right? So.
Well, Allison, this was just amazing. I was going to say, I'm so jealous of your PowerPoint skills.
You go on to
gosh.
SlideGo, and it's a template. They give you literally like 60 slides and you just pick, right? And then you just edit whatever it is.
It makes the service slides look really, not so great. Yeah. So who has questions for Allison? This is just outstanding. You just really have it down to a science. Anybody?
Yeah. Because I mentor in the schools, I've seen this. It's so sad. These kids, when they started coming back, they didn't know how to act. They didn't know how to act in the classroom. And in the schools that I mentor, I mean, these parents weren't around. These kids probably weren't eating all day. And, it's taken all this time, and it's going to take more time for these kids to get used to being in class and sitting there and not pounding their neighbor and paying attention and not jumping up. And, it's really sad.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, to that point, I mean, I even saw Robbie, like sometimes, where I would kind of just peek in every now and then. And he was in first grade doing in the 2021 school year, and he would be jumping on his bed. I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, oh, I'm done with my work. I'm like, but the teacher is talking. Like, what is happening here? Because no one was there, right? No one was there, right?
Yeah. It was really, and the teachers had to learn so much.
Yeah.
I mean, they went into it not knowing anything, and they had to teach themselves all this stuff.
Yeah.
Plus being with the kids that were doing different things at different times.
Right. Yeah.
It was really sad.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, like for elementary school, like especially in the early elementary, how do you do like reading groups, right?
Yeah.
Instead of calling students to your table, like, okay, you're all in the same reading level, right? What do you do instead, right? So instead, you put them in a group, right? I could put you guys into a Zoom, breakout room right now. And, but then the other kids aren't being seen, right? And so what the teachers had to do was during that time, or before that time, they had to say specifically, okay, you, and you need to be working on this, and here it is, and would slam it into their, Google Classroom or whatever. And then you, and you work on that, right? So they're doing like 3 different things. And then, the rest of you were doing the reading group kind of thing, right?
But there was no one checking them at home. That's
Exactly.
the thing.
Exactly.
So the kids were taking long recesses. They were running outside to play.
Mhm.
I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
it's really sad.
How do you teach a kindergartner how to read at home without a parent there? I mean,
Yeah.
it's really challenging. And I do some of the same work as Bunny, and I do some reading tutoring with 3rd graders. And the 3rd graders are still learning alphabet letters. These
Yes.
lower income kids that don't have the support at home, they are so far behind.
Yeah.
We're seeing some of the lower income elementary school kids are really having a hard time catching up. And are you seeing anything that shows any kind of a study with relation to different socioeconomic issues?
Yeah, it's definitely from what I've been seeing, and reading, both in terms of studies and just personally working at Zion Benton, right? Like, we have a huge range of socioeconomics. It really is that for a lot of the students that didn't have anybody at home, right? Or that it was like their 14-year-old or 13-year-old sister or cousin that was in charge, right? Who was doing their own schoolwork at the time, right? I don't know how to teach it, that says Apple, right? There it is, there, go, kind of thing, right? It's those kids that are really coming into like middle school and high school with just kind of a
So far behind. Yeah.
whatever attitude about things.
Esther?
Yeah,
Sorry, Allison, did I interrupt you?
Yeah, no, totally fine.
Okay.
Totally fine.
To that point, I just want to continue that conversation, but have you seen anything that gives us hope that that gap will get filled? Or are we just losing kids?
I think it's a combination of both, right? I think that it's going to be a couple of years until we see some of those kids come into high school, right? The current 8th graders, they were in 5th grade when the pandemic started, right? And so it's still going to be a couple of years till we kind of have everything come through. I think at some point, it's both positive and negative. I think at some point, especially in middle school, the middle schools are going to start saying, hey, you should have learned that, right? Like, there's no more like pandemic gap, right? Academically, it's still going to be there behaviorally, right? Because they're not being checked. I think this year, let me back up. I think last year was when the behaviors really came out, right? And those kind of got checked in place. I think we're going to start seeing, because schools still have the ESSER funds, and there's a lot of schools that are still doing like some intensive tutoring and that kind of thing. I think it's going to be another couple of years before we see the gaps close. I think that the gaps are going to be wider, though, in terms of academic achievement between different socioeconomic levels, wider than they were before the pandemic. Before the pandemic, we were doing a pretty good job kind of overall, kind of narrowing those gaps. The pandemic just blew everything open. And it's like at some point, it's kind of like shoving a door closed against a wall of water, right? How do you, there's going to be leaks, right? It's not going to be perfect. And I think it's going to take some time. But I also think that school administration has short memories a lot of times. And when the ESSER money runs out and isn't renewed by the federal government, because I think it's 2025 when that runs out, I think that's going to be the end of it.
Is there any special training for, I mean, I'm thinking of 5th and 6th grade teachers who really don't know how to teach reading.
Yeah.
But yet these kids coming in haven't learned to read because.
Yeah. So a lot of schools do have reading specialists, and separately from the teachers. And so what a lot of the districts have done this year especially is kind of waited to see in a way kind of how test scores kind of stabilized in a way. And then from last year and then this year, they're looking at like the MAP test, for example, is given 3 times a year. And so between the fall and the winter, they're looking for like certain score levels on the elementary side of things, and seeing, okay, who really needs this? And there's a lot of districts I've been hearing that for the second half of the school year, they're really pulling the really low test score students that don't have an IEP, not special ed, that kind of stuff,
Right.
that they're pulling them into like specialized like Saturday schools or after school, like, hey, you're invited kind of thing. And so it's like the reading teacher, for example, with like some of the like 2nd, 3rd grade teachers who do have the experience with the literacy, beginnings of literacy education, helping like the 4th and 5th graders with it, right? But if you've been around 5th graders, 5th graders are a lot like teenagers, where they suddenly become cool and they're like, I don't need this, kind of thing. And so it's kind of hard sometimes for like someone who's used to 2nd graders, right? Like still in like that cutesy kind of phase to be like, why are you like so hardened about this now? Right. So sometimes they're taking some of the middle school teachers and kind of training them. How do you, in 5th grade teachers, how do you do this? With students that are, a little bit older, right?
Allison, the presentation was amazing, Allison. I really appreciate that. And, having a
Good night, everybody.
Good night, Rabbi. Thank you.
Thank you, Allison.